about this as the same person as the West Coast unless there was something to this. In the last 22 years, I've talked to hundreds of what we call adult survivors. And the next major case I'd like to mention is the Nebraska case. In 1988, I received a phone call from Lincoln, Nebraska. One of my college friends said, "Ted, you better get back here." There was a major investigation headed up by John DeCamp, former state senator, a good friend of mine. And John had taken on the task of exposing a group of high-level politicians in the state of Nebraska and some of the top businessmen. As a result of this case, the kids who were part of the network came forward. There were 80 children because of the publicity on a pedophile pornographic arrest. 4 of them gave statements. 2 of the 4 later recanted. 2 stood by what they originally initially said. And what we developed there was that children were being taken out of orphanages and foster homes, driven to Sioux City, Iowa, 184 miles away, and flown to Washington, D.C. for sex orgy parties with congressmen and senators. The person in charge was a fellow named Larry King, a black man, not Larry King Live. And he was president of the Franklin Savings and Loan, which was a savings and loan established to help the minorities. He had a salary of $17,000 a year. He was paying $5,000 a month for a condominium in Washington, D.C. for these parties. As a result of the investigation, we learned also that there was an international child kidnapping ring operating out of the Midwest and all the way into Washington, D.C. Paul Benassi, one of the kids who I interviewed for 5 hours, I've got him on 5 hours of tape, by the way. I need to make that tape available to you, but I'm so busy, I'm kind of like a one-armed paper hanger, that I just haven't had time to do it. But Paul Benassi, when he was 10, 11, 12 years old, was recruited by these people to be one of them and to act as a buffer and in shopping centers, parks, public places, to attract the children at his age over near the car. The adults involved in the ring would grab them and they would kidnap them. The kids, of course, talked about satanic cult ceremonies. They talked about the kidnapping ring. Paul's life has been turned upside down because he refused to recant, as did Alicia Owens, the other person who refused to recant. Alicia's still serving time in prison for lying to the grand jury. She was convicted of that. When she was 14 years old, she had sex with the chief of police, Bob Wadman. That's what she said. And the other kids backed her up. Other top businessmen who were identified were Harold Anderson, publisher of the Omaha World Herald, the head of the Society page in Omaha, Eugene Mahoney, who was a former Vice Squad police officer in Omaha and is now head of the Forestry Service for the state of Nebraska. And the list goes on and on and on. The pedophile ring, homosexual pedophile ring, they were transporting these kids from Omaha to Des Moines, to Minneapolis, to Milwaukee, to Madison, and back to Omaha. So, unfortunately, the investigator prior to my entering the case, Gary Caradori, had learned about some pictures. And these pictures were the smoking gun of the case. Pictures of politicians having sex with children and other unbelievable acts, boys and girls and so forth. So the official photographer of the group was a fellow named Russell Nelson. And Rusty was a farm boy from Nebraska. He had never seen the bright lights of the big city. And he was enamored with the rich and the famous and the jet airplanes and the trips around the world, actually. And he was a professional photographer, and he started out by working in a gay club, taking pictures for the club. And he was recruited from there into the sex ring. Rusty was not himself homosexual. I'm convinced of it. I've spent quite a bit of time with him. He, in connection with his work, would sneak a roll of film in on occasion when he was photographing these acts, because they were taking the, quote, official film away from him as soon as it was completed. Rusty sent these pictures back home, and he also scattered them around the United States, negatives and photographs themselves. He was sold for sex by Larry King to a businessman in Washington, D.C., and he said to the businessman, "Let me go in the bathroom and wash up," and instead of coming back out, he went out the back window and he disappeared. He was living on a farm, one of his parents' farms in Nebraska, for quite a while, and the FBI came around to his parents' home asking for Rusty, and the mother said, "Well, he's over at such and such a farmhouse." They went over and interviewed him, and of course it was basically, as he told me, it was an harassment. And then he left and had to go into hiding someplace else. His folks came back several months later to the farm to check it out. It had been abandoned, but it was a beautiful place, 1.5 miles from any neighbor, and somebody had gone in with high-powered rifles and totally destroyed it, tipped over the furnace. They shot 13 bullets through the refrigerator door, front, out the back, and out the house. So you know what a powerful weapon that had to be. They shot bullets into the ceiling and out the walls. There was a van outside that was running. They shot it up, broke all the windows. I asked Rusty, in fact, I asked him on camera, and I'll tell you a little bit about Rusty in just a few minutes, in addition to what I'm telling you now. How and who would know that this was there, that you were there, and so forth? He said the only people that knew were his parents and then the FBI. He's convinced that this was a tactic by the FBI. John DeCamp, the state senator, who was really headed up the whole investigation, and who, by the way, has obtained a $1 million judgment, has been diligently working on the case and has refused to back down. Rusty, after the FBI interviewed him on his farm, decided he had to hit the road, and so he obtained a van and some window washing equipment. This is pretty clever of what he did, because he knew that they'd be tracing him, looking for him. And he drove all over the United States, in and out of towns, and washed windows. No record of a pay stub. But unfortunately, about 3 years later, they caught up with him in Portland, Oregon. And he was arrested for having a broken taillight. In the back of his van, he had pictures of nudes, which professional photographers do on a regular basis, nothing pornography. And the police told him that there was a picture of a juvenile in the back of the van, and therefore they arrested him, and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison. He never faced his accuser. They would never tell him the name of the person who was supposedly a juvenile. Rusty's out and on probation. When he gets off probation, I located him on a farm in Oregon. And I drove from Las Vegas up to Oregon, picked him up and brought him back. And then I said to Rusty, "Rusty, let's go look for those pictures." And Rusty said, "Good idea, let's go." So last October, November, for 2.5 months, Rusty and I lived out of the back of my pickup truck. Nothing fancy, a 4-cylinder Nissan that could barely get up the hills in Colorado. And as a matter of fact, on one occasion, it stalled. We were going up through this pass, and I just couldn't go any higher, even in first gear. Anyway, Rusty had a number of locations where he placed these pictures, at least he said that. There were 5 in Colorado. We went to the first one, which was an abandoned mine mill. He had placed them up behind the rafters toward the back of the mill. The pictures were gone. but there was a dynamite cap there. The second location was up about 2 miles up a mountain. Went up there, and it appeared that those pictures had been washed away. The third location was a mine. We found the mine, and it had the steel door on it, so we couldn't get in. The fourth location was in a cave on the side of a cliff near a waterfall about 300 feet straight down. And Rusty had weighed 165 pounds when he hit it in that cave. He now weighs about 240. So we went into town, and I got a nice rope, good rope that held 2,200 pounds, as I recall, a harness, hooked it on the back of my truck for safety, and we lowered him down. Well, he slipped, and it was getting dark, and he hurt himself, and unfortunately, because of the difference in the weight, 165 to 240, he couldn't pull himself back up. So I had a handy talkie. I said, Rusty, come on, we'll come back next year. Come on up. So we finally got him up, and we went on our way. And going back to the farmhouse where somebody shot it up, and I would have to say it was probably the FBI, Rusty had hidden some of the pictures under the desk, the top of the desk, in the farmhouse. These are pictures of some of our leading politicians having sex with kids, okay? And that when we were there, we examined it, and of course the desk had been pried open and the pictures were gone. The question then arises, well, Rusty, how do I know there are any pictures? And if there were, how do we know that somebody came along and got them? And how would they know that they were there? Rusty told me when he was in jail in Portland, he thought he was doped, drugged. And they'd come in, guards and other men would come in at night and interview him, and he thinks he may have told them at that time where some of the locations of the pictures are. But there are some other locations that there's no need to discuss them here in detail. But as a result of that trip, and really the real basis for the trip is to do a video, do our own video, Rusty and John DeCamp and I. Now, on the back table back there, I've got a videotape that says Conspiracy of Silence. Let me tell you about this, and this is where I came up with the idea to grab Rusty and go find these pictures. There was a TV crew from Yorkshire Television in England that came over in the early 1990s. They were here for 7 months, and they filmed this whole case, the one I'm telling you about. It was to be aired on Discovery Channel May the 4th, 1990.